Like Atala, yeah.
All right. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming this morning. Welcome to an introduction to intercultural communication. I'm Ellen Haynes. I'm one of the conference organizers, and I'm here to introduce our fabulous presenter, Ruth Martinez Alicea. So Ruth has over 25 years of experience working to dismantle systems of oppression and to foster supportive and equity-centered environments throughout our region, most recently with the Oregon Food Bank. We are so excited to have her here with us today. She is a fantastic speaker. I am not taking up any more of her time. Please join me in welcoming Ruth Martinez Alicea.
So good to be here. I need to let you know, maybe I should move here. There are fires. This is a real thing. There are fires. And this morning I had to support some folks that are fleeing fires, and that took me a little extra time this morning. So I apologize. But it's a case of I'm sorry, not sorry. Because really, people are trying to survive. This is happening live right now. So our thoughts, our love, our care is with our neighbors and our friends and our families that are right now working to protect their families and their homes. And we're, of course, very thankful for those who are, that are protecting them and folks that are in the front lines. Yes, my name is Ruth Martinez Alicea. If you roll your R, you get credit. I don't know what kind of credit, but credit. And I'm originally from Puerto Rico, which I will say like 20 more times before our time is over. I am one of those Puerto Ricans that doesn't stop saying, ooh, Boricua. Yeah, wepa. All right. And I've been doing social justice work since 1996. I know I look like 27, but I'm 47 and proud still. It hurts a little, but I'm okay. And I started, yes, back home, mostly working with communities, with youth and the prevention of HIV AIDS in universities and the prevention of domestic and sexual violence there, and then Illinois and Oregon. I've been super lucky to be able to do this particular training since about 2005. It is one of the trainings that is the least controversial. Isn't it cool? Like, because my other trainings are very controversial. So this is like one of those like super practical. We are like, oh yeah, I know that, and now I get to put a name on it. So that's kind of the experience that usually we have. So what you can expect today, first I need to give credit to several people. This is kind of a response to a presentation created by Chris Billhart. Chris Billhart is a fantastic human being that maybe you don't know her, but we owe her a lot in our community as a leader in the prevention of domestic and sexual violence and the prevention and creating spaces to really create real solutions. And she created a training on what she called ethical communication for folks that were working with survivors. And it was a great training, except that it didn't have an equity lens or an intercultural communication lens. So I thought, this is really good, and I want to adopt it. So I want to first give credit to Chris Billhart, and at the same time say, yeah, Chris, you're awesome, and this other thing. So that's what this is mostly about. And I've been doing this particular training since 98 in this particular response with Chris Billhart's foundation since 2011. So what you can expect, and I think I should, okay, so who else gets credit? Mommy and Papi, Julio and Noemi, who are back home in Puerto Rico. who are really the people responsible for what I do. So if you have a problem, I'll give you their phone number. All right, let's see if I click the right thing. I'm not clicking the right thing. Maybe I need to turn this on. It's on. Okay, I can do this. Manual. Okay, this is actually better. Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay.
Okay, so what you can expect from today is that we will talk. So I'm not going to be the only one speaking. In my work for social justice, I also support learning spaces with the principles of social justice, which means that one of the principles is that the wisdom lives in the collective. So it's not going to be just me talking, right? So we're going to share. I'll repeat in case other folks online. There's hybrid, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So
Yes.
There's other folks online, and questions or comments will come through the chat. And I'll let you know.
Perfect. Thank you so much for hosting. Thank you, people online. We will share. If the sound is not clear, I'll repeat. Just let me know, folks online. In that, I'm going to have a little bit of time when I'll be kind of more didactic traditional learning, talking about some basics and foundational stuff about intercultural communication, and then we'll do some exercises. And depending on how we jive, we will either have small groups or I will have some volunteers role playing with me, which is the most common one. So just keep that in mind. If you don't want to role play, you don't role play. I know some folks have, the anxiety around performance. It's okay. You won't be made to do that. I will say, however, that we rarely get an opportunity to rehearse live. We're constantly just living the life, and we typically don't have opportunities to rehearse and try out things. So I'm a fan of role plays because of that, even though I'm a very good actress and I make others feel a little self-conscious about their acting, but we will get over that, okay? All right, good. All right, so we are going to start by just having a conversation about, okay, so that's not enter maybe? Clicking maybe? No. Clicking here. Ha! I win. Threw it against the machine and she wins again. Okay. So let's get the juices going and have what have we heard? What have we heard? So it might be something that you believe good communication is, or something that you have heard that you're not sure, or something that you have heard over and over and over that you just don't agree with. And I have the most terrible handwriting. Oh, thank you. Yes, volunteer. Wonderful.
Go, Carol.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. All right, collective. It takes a village. All right. High fives. All right. So, let's anything, because notice that the question is what you have heard, what do you think? So anything will be the right answer. Like there's no wrong answer. And I invite, of course, folks online to use the chat to include what have you heard is good communication. Honest. Good communication, honest.
Active listening.
Active listening. So for communication to happen, it's not I'm speaking alone in my house, which I do. I speak with my cat and my plants and alone. That is not effective communication. I'm just doing my thing. Okay, good. What else is good communication? Eye contact. Okay, so body language. There's something about communication that is also about our stance, our posture, anything else that you have heard.
Self-aware.
Self-aware.
Knowing what you're bringing.
Okay, so you have clear intentionality and you're trying your best to then bring it forward. Okay. Anything else? Have you heard? Uh-huh.
Open to change.
Open to change. That is rarely offered in this training. Yes.
I get extra points?
Yes,
Another
yes.
pose.
And can you roll your R on top of it? No? Okay. But that extra points nonetheless. All right. Anything else, right? Open to change. So that means that I'm receptive. There's John Gottman, who is the guru of marriage, says that you're influentiable. Like people can influence you. Okay. Anything else? Good communication is you've heard that thing that you have in your mind. Go ahead.
It's with respect and you use I statements.
Okay, respect using I statements. Yes, something we'll talk more about respect because it's so culturally bound. But yes, there's a commonality about good communication has to have some level of respect. Go ahead.
Non-judgmental.
Non-judgmental, which is quite impossible for human beings. So the good communication gets to be like, oh, I am actually not able to do it as a human being if it includes non-judgmental. Right? Our brains are designed to judge.
If we're trying to get a point across and it's maybe nonverbal communication, it has to be clear.
Clear, which is also like respect. Very culturally bound, and we'll talk more about that. So clear, respectful, intentional, self-aware, honest. Anything else that you've heard? This is what good, ethical, maybe professional communication.
You want confirmation that you are understanding them and they are.
Clarification, right? So we clarify. Some people say it's reflecting back.
Not emotional.
Rational, not emotional. That makes me feel a certain way. Yeah, I'm a Puerto Rican. So my culture is emotionally expressive. The US is emotionally constrained, right? So when I speak my way, not exactly professional, but yes, this is something we've heard, is non-emotional. Go ahead.
Cultural awareness.
It's culturally aware. And culture is not just aware of the other, it's aware that I bring my own culture to this equation. There's no standard. Well, I would love it if there was no standard culture, right? So culturally aware of what I'm bringing. So if I grew up in the US, I'm very likely to be, in the example that I just gave, emotionally constrained. If I grew up in Puerto Rico, the likelihood is that I will be emotionally expressive. Right? So I'm culturally aware of what I bring. And then I know some about other ways of being that impact communication. All right, anything else that we want to add to this list?
There's a message in the chat saying adaptive.
Adaptive, that is great. So that has to do also with, being open, being influenceable. Is that the word, influenceable? That's right. Like I am able to be influenced in one way or another.
Maybe influenceable.
Influenceable. Yes, I think you're right. Yeah. I do trainings just as an excuse to learn English. People teach me all the time. All right. So let's then go to the things we have heard or think or feel about people who don't do this. People who don't do this are, go ahead. Irrational. Going in. Yeah. Yes, let's go in. Well, clearly irrational. Okay, what else? You don't do this, therefore
You're insensitive.
you're insensitive. You don't care. You don't care about me. Stubborn. Yes, because you're rigid, right? We've been saying that you're open, adaptable. So then rigid. Uh-huh.
Might be a cultural barrier, maybe a language issue.
Then we go to their barriers, and barriers are attached to deficit.
I was thinking maybe a barrier for me to not understand their communication.
So, okay, so your deficit.
Yeah.
Huh. So there's something, and it's great if our flag goes to, there might be a cultural difference. That's not usually where we go. But after today, we might. Uh-huh.
Self-centered.
Self-centered, right? Because if you're not doing these things, you're selfish. Okay, anything else? Things that we have heard about or think or feel on the chat?
Chat's mentioning arrogant.
Arrogance, yes, thank you so much. And those feelings, when I feel that someone around me is being arrogant, I don't go, woohoo, they're being arrogant. No, I'm annoyed. Interruptive. Like, oh. And I saw another hand.
Just plain wrong.
Just plain wrong. Thank you. Just let it go. Go in. They're wrong. They're just wrong. Yes. Communication is the thing. It's like the glue. And it could be verbal. There are many ways of communicating, right? But it's that social glue. So when we get that wrong, we are going to feel strongly. It's okay. They're wrong. They're irrational. They're not smart. We don't know that if they're trustworthy. They're not professional. Okay, so let's just hold those things. So we have standards, ways of thinking of this is what's right, this is what's good. And when we don't do those things, those folks, because rarely it applies to us, those folks are wrong, are the other. Okay, so let's hold it there. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. What's your name?
Carol.
Carol, thank you so much, Carol. All right. So we're going to hold this here because we're going to come back to this list. Things that we've heard. And something that did not make the list, but I want to make sure that we consider is that, and it's part of my reaction to Chris Billhart's initial version of this training, is that you should be direct. Anybody has heard that good communication is direct? Anybody? Just two? Oh, good. Have you heard that it should be concise? Good communication is direct, is concise. The direct communication, which we will be focusing on today, is actually used by 20% of the global population. 80% of the people use indirect communication and use storytelling, which is not very concise, and is very high context, so a lot of context. 80%. 20%, and that is from countries that are mostly impacted by Western colonization and imperialism. Oh, what a coincidence. So let's keep that in mind. All right. So I'm going to go, okay, so not that one. I won again. So some brief discussions to make sure that we are kind of on the same page on this. So I'll try to be brief and concise and direct because I'm such a good communicator. Okay, so I will read from here. Okay, so what is the purpose of communication? Anything. You know it. This is not a trick question. Why do we communicate? To understand each other. We are creating meaning together, right? And making sense of the context that we share. Right? So we're creating meaning together so that we understand the context that we share. So it's a social tool. Right? I don't need communication to live alone. Okay, so it's a social tool to create meaning and make sense of the context that we share. Therefore, communication is going to be attached to culture. Communication is irreversible. I learned that when I was 23, thank goodness. Although I was very regretful about the previous 22 years. Because I was like, that's true. I cannot take back what I say. Once it's out there, what I can do is clarify, try and fix, but it's out there, it's irreversible. So communication is highly consequential. This blows my mind because we speak about the context that we share. And how are we aware of the context that we share? How do I know that I live? There's a cheat sheet there. Yes, senses. Oh my God, yes, senses. So we have these channels to kind of perceive the world. Right? So we have touch. What else do we have?
Sight.
Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and maybe you see dead people. Just kidding. Well, I don't know. I don't. So yes, these 5 senses, right? Those are like channels that then the world that I experience, the context, like comes in and I can perceive it. There are many folks in the sciences world, which I'm not part of, that say that, you know, if we had more channels, we would experience more things about our context. And some things are actually kind of proven that dogs can hear whistles that is it whistle?
High-pitched sounds.
That is better, high pitch. Can say high pitched sounds that many of us cannot hear, right? So it's like, oh, so there are experiences in this world that if my channel to perceive it was different or I had additional ones, I could actually experience that, and that can come to be part of the context that I can then communicate about. So, but we have this 5 senses, which has been great. I'm not saying that it's very limited, because they're not. They're awesome. 5 senses. And I experience life through those senses. And then perception comes to play because I am simultaneously experiencing all of my senses. But through culture, I then prioritize, prioritize certain experiences. For example, I am a very tactile person. I went to art school. I did sculpture because I needed to touch it. So I remember, for me if my hands are rough, it's very present in my experience that my hands are not soft and they're rough, right? I also have a very sensitive sense of smell. That it is a curse. It's a terrible, terrible curse to have a very sensitive sense of smell. So it is very present in my experience, right? So then those are things that kind of come to my consciousness very fast. Very fast. I remember places with smell. I remember my aunt's place when I was like 4 years old. Yeah, I remember that smell, that wet wood, that's the one, right? So then I prioritize things that remain in my consciousness and things that go to places that I'm not as conscious about. And our brains have neuronal passages. That's a thing. That's a thing. It's very concrete in that way. In that I have things that I have easy access to because those neurons, that connection is so common that I go there first. And some that maybe I don't think that my sense of hearing is very delicate. Thank goodness, because I'm very loud. So I think it's a self-preservation thing. So I think that those connections to memory through the sound, it probably is just more fainted than my other experiences. So perception. So those are the perceptual filters are part of my biology and informed by culture. For example, we are in the US, very, very visual culture. So, and very verbal, very, very verbal culture. So those are cultural perceptual filters, and we'll talk more about it. Don't worry. But those I need to name as filters from the experience to what I'm conscious about to what I talk about, which is why language and communication in general is an abstraction, because it's not the thing, right? So I go on a hike and I tell you about my hike. Then what I tell you about the hike is an abstraction of my experience of the hike. And then on top of it, I experience the hike simultaneously through my senses, but I cannot tell you my experience simultaneously. I need to do it linearly. So then this abstraction is more than just cubism. It's more like, what is the, okay. Yes, and the main artist of that expression is Jackson Pollock, right? So all of a sudden my language, my communication is Jackson Pollock painting. All the way from my hike. I think it's a miracle that we communicate at all. I mean, this is all the things that have to go through. And somehow we approximate each other to the experiences that we share. It is amazing. That's why I'm like, still, those 5 senses, awesome. All right. So on top of all of that biological filters for communication, we also have the meanings we create attached to culture. And we'll talk about diversity and those filters. How are we doing? Good. All right. Okay, so let's just definition stuff. This is, the most traditional way of learning. Intercultural communication is defined by Janet Bennett, who actually recently passed away and is international leader of intercultural communication. A set of cognitive, affective, so cognitive thinking, affective, emotional, and behavioral skills. So there are skills related to the way I think, the way I feel, the way I behave, and characteristics that support effective and appropriate, we'll go back to that, interaction in a variety of cultural contexts. Intercultural communication doesn't mean that you're supposed to be an expert of all cultures so that you can do this effectively. Yes, the more specific cultural knowledge you have, the more skills you have, right? Knowledge about difference in culture, but mostly about my own culture. Like when I know, like, oh, I know why I tend to communicate in this way, and what is more important to me to make sure that you got than this other thing. It's all cultural. So I have this skills, this knowledge, or skills related to knowing, to feeling, to behaving, so that I can effectively, not expertly, not okay and good and perfectly every time, right? So anybody here doesn't swim at all? Okay, so we have one person, thank you for sharing, who doesn't swim at all. Who here is an expert swimmer like Michael Phelps? Okay, so there's a range, right? From not at all to you don't stand a chance, right? So we can have a huge range of capacity, not expertise, not perfection, right? A range of capacity that allows us to navigate different contexts more effectively, right? Appropriate interaction. So intercultural communication is not aiming for all of us to become experts, but rather equipped. I love that. I'm a very practical woman, thanks to my mother, Noemi Alicea, awesome woman, very practical. So this is one of the models that I use most often for my trainings, and apparently one that stays with people. So we're gonna go in because apparently it's a very effective tool. This is an examination of culture through the model of an iceberg. Have you, anybody seen Titanic? I'm sorry. Right? I've seen it too many times. And not even because I like it, it's circumstantially the people around me. I'm like, okay, we're gonna do this. Anyway, why did the Titanic sink? Iceberg. But why did they not avoid it?
The captain was going too fast. I actually saw a documentary.
So not only the movie, we have a documentaries now. They were too fast, but part of being too fast in that area, the danger is that icebergs, you can see the what? The tip, the top, the tip. You can only see like this little, I'm like, oh, there's an iceberg. And every time underwater, that iceberg is gonna be way, way, way bigger. Right? So let's think about culture like an iceberg. And usually, particularly in the US, when we talk about culture, we typically think about what? Food. I do that too. Entertainment. Sports. Art. Music. Literature. I call that the deliverables of culture, because I speak English. It's like what culture produces, and it's the evidence that there's something there, right? It's the tip of the iceberg. It tells me there's something underneath, that because of that underneath, then we have that tip that is created. The tip doesn't exist without the massive parts, right? So these are the deliverables. There's another word in English, indicators. God, I'm on fire. Indicators of culture. And these indicators then are mostly in awareness. And they're the product of things about culture that are mostly out of awareness. So those things are typically in this model then underwater. It's not like it's impossible to learn about them, right? Is that it takes intentionality to learn about them. It takes moments like this. Let's talk about intercultural communication and let's think about these things. So then let's put on our scuba diving, and then we're going to go underwater, and we're going to consider some of the concepts highlighted about intercultural communication in this model. Now, not everything about culture is included here. So it's not like this is the most, all there is about culture. But there is some important concepts about culture that are included. So I'm gonna give ourselves about 5-8 seconds to glance. Glance the list of aspects about culture that are underwater. And I want you to think about what is either surprising or important or something that you want to know more about. ¿Qué pasó? ¿Que lo pongo afuera?
You lanyard. It's rubbing the microphone.
Oh, my liner. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't do the... All right. It was a little bit of Tetris, a little bit, but we did it. Thank you. Sorry, folks online, and thank you for letting us know. All right. So something that is surprising, important, or you want to know more about. Uh-huh.
The difference between conception of past and future and ordering of time.
Yeah, isn't that like, you're like, what do you mean? Like, there's only one order.
Well, but like, what's the difference, right? Because if you have a concept of past and future, and then you have a difference of ordering of time, but past and future is the ordering of time. Like that's, I'm not sure what the difference is.
Right. Go ahead.
I feel like, I don't know, not to start a discussion, but I feel like many different cultures have like Monday, the first day on the calendar, as opposed to Sunday. There's also just like different calendars out there. Maybe that's a different way of thinking of ordering of time.
That is one of the things. I grew up with day, month, year. This thing in the US of month, day, year is like, you're the wrong order. Well, in 1998, when I moved from Puerto Rico, I'll say it again. Everything I was like, wrong, oh, wrong, oh, you're wrong. So yes, that's part of it. Like, how do we make sense of time? But it mostly refers to what is most important and what drives me. So in the US is very future oriented. What's the goal? We're walking to, we're wanting to achieve, right? So let's do this. Just focus on the future. Indigenous cultures like the Taínos, and I'm Taína, there's a focus on my ancestors. And it's something that is constantly in my brain, for better and worse, is, am I honoring my abuela, my abuelo? It's almost paranoid. Like, oh, I don't know, you slept 1 hour more than you should have. That's dishonoring your parents. That's also capitalism, but not today's session. But so I'm very driven by what I learned from my abuelo and my abuela, what I learned from those who came before me in social justice movements. I've been asked many times, oh, Ruth, have you written a book? I'm like, I have nothing new to say. Like, it's been said. I'll tell you what to read because it's been said. Because I'm like, what am I supposed to write about if, I've learned from my ancestors, right? So that is my driver. But in other cultures also is the present moment. Zen Buddhism, cultures that are very impacted by Zen Buddhism, then you're not attached to the past, you're not attached to the present. It's right now, this brief moment. It's mindfulness of this particular moment, right? And the wisdom and the driver is about this moment. So that is what those aspects about culture are referring to. But notice, at least for me, it was like, what do you mean? Order of time. Then, okay, so this is actually impacted by culture. What else?
I think my lesson looking, I think it's conception of justice, especially within like a core context. Different cultures have been through different experiences. So, especially within like considering the mainstream culture that we live in, the people making the decisions may not necessarily be the ones affected. So, different cultures have different senses of what actual justice is. So, and I think that's incredibly relevant to our work here every day. It's like an ongoing process.
Yes, stars, all the credits to our colleague here. Yes, how do we define justice? Right, the westernized countries, justice is very related to punishment. Right, because westernized countries are more transactional, this and this, right? Operate in binaries, dichotomies. In other cultures, when someone harms a person or a community, and usually the concept is that, oh, you have harmed the community. This is a sense of proof. You have forgotten how much we love you. We need to remind you of the love that binds us. And that's justice. Very different. And that is all culturally attached. Culturally atravesado. I love that word. It is so illustrative. How do you say atravesado? Anybody speak Spanish?
Not enough to translate that.
Okay. It's more than
like
intersected.
It's like throughout.
Yeah, it's intersected in part of you now. Atravesado. Someone from the chat?
Some folks online have said definition of insanity and theory of disease.
Those are my two favorites. Yay! Thank you, folks from the community out in the interwebs. So I have a friend who did a Peace Corps. I won't remember the name of the country. It was an African country. And her work was mostly about prevention of like stomach flu type diseases. And part of her approach was to teach people the connection between washing our hands and a stomach disease. And her experience was like, when I would say that, it was almost as if I was saying, in order to not have a tummy ache, spray paint your lawn purple. Because there was a cultural disconnect. Right? The framework of understanding disease is not the Western medicine. Right? I had a colleague who is a mom, and when we would get sick, we actually shared an office for several years. It was first, there might be a soul to be found. You have to do the spiritual work first, and then we'll go to the doctor, but it's not going to work without this process. My family, part of my family in Puerto Rico, is Pentecostal. So I get sick, we pray. So then the theory of the disease, like how do we understand disease to be, will determine then what is it that we do in order to fix it, to address it, to navigate it. And it's not always based on Western science. Not always based on Western justice. In the US, the first diagnostic statistical manual book, there was something called, and some doctors still use it, the Puerto Rican syndrome. Anybody knows what the Puerto Rican syndrome is? How do you have the Puerto Rican syndrome? You need to be Puerto Rican. So by virtue of being Puerto Rican, you have a disease. And it has to do with grieving. Like we cry a lot. We express our emotions. And then not only that is not professional, that is sick. Deviant.
Sounds like women being hypochondriacs.
Yes, hysterical. There's a syndrome attached to many of us. No, you don't know that syndrome? Premenstrual? Oh, you just don't say the word menstrual. I say it a lot, menstrual. It's part of the body. Like, I'm a mom of a 9-year-old. We talk about poop. Poop. No problem. It's part of the body. Anyway, so by virtue of having a particular body specifically attached or associated to a gender, we're sick. Okay, that's cultural, attached to culture. Okay, one last one before we move on. And I'm like, how much more time I have? We're good. We're so good.
Let's go relationship to animals.
Nice. So beautiful. Okay, I grew up. Where did I grow up?
Puerto
Oh,
Rico.
that's right. And everybody on the chat, yeah, also, you're aware? And I grew up in very rural part of Puerto Rico until I was 13. So the house I grew up was on the hills of many cows. Many cows. And those cows were grazing cows, mostly for milk. So it was very free range. And they would come back to whatever ranch thing. I don't know the words. Not in English, not in Spanish. And gave us milk. So that was the treatment in Puerto Rico. What is mostly the treatment of cows in the US?
Food.
Slaughter, and they don't free range it. Like they're not very free. And in India?
Sacred.
Sacred.
Sacred. Our relationship to animals is very different. Puerto Rico, dogs don't usually live inside the house. First of all, it's tropical, so hello. You'll be fine outside. And second, they're not considered, usually, like a family member. It's a pet. It's a pet. My mom would always be like, oh. She would roll her eyes. And my brother has a pet that is a family member. And of course, my mom's like, oh. But because generally in Puerto Rico, our relationship to the dogs is very different. Right? It's culturally impacted. Is it traversed? I know I'm trying to think about that word. Atravesado. Informed. Impacted. Shaped. Okay. When I moved to Illinois in 1998 to go to grad school, by the way, didn't finish. Cultural shock is a real thing. I got depressed. I was 85 pounds by the time I went back to Puerto Rico. It's a real thing. Was not very versed in intercultural communication, for sure. So anyway, the first night, it was not the first night, but a few, very soon after I arrived, there was a social with the cohort of students from the School of Fine Arts, which I was part of. And I met a few people. And next day was a more formal meeting with the instructors, the professors. And the cohort was sitting at you remember those conference tables? Big ones. And then the instructors were all around the table. And this person who I had met the night before, which of course is the only person I knew, I was like, best friends forever, had something in front of them. I do not remember what it was. Maybe it was a water bottle, but I don't know. There was something in front of them. And I look at them from across the table, and I go like this. Yeah, that was her face too. And I'm like, what's happening? Anybody knows what I was doing?
Pointing.
I'm pointing. In Puerto Rico, we're too busy. We have a lot of work to do. So our fingers apparently are busy. So we are using our lips, and we're washing clothes. So over there, right? So we point with our lips. And I'm like, and people are looking at me. And I'm like, what's going on? I'm confused. So I decided that I needed to help her. So I did this. Anybody knows what I'm saying? I was like, but I'm speaking so clearly. No, I'm like that. What is that? That, what is it? And for 23 years, I did the lip thing and the nose thing, and it had never failed. For me, it was a universal language. It was universal to my iceberg. But it did not cross icebergs as I came to understand. Because it was a pause, like people stopped talking at that point. I was so disruptive, and I'm like, I'm being quiet here. Like, why would people so? What did I do? But I crossed the lines, cultural lines, right? And people were confused and wondering if I needed medical attention. But I didn't. But this is just a classic way of understanding how we navigate difference, particularly cultural differences. First of all, when we don't know difference, right? So in my world, I did not know that there was a thing in Puerto Rico, or particular to some cultures, that we point with our lips and ask why with our nose. So I assumed sameness. So when we don't know difference, we assume sameness. And that's a human thing, because our brains cannot do that lip and just start leap, not lip, leap. And start like imagining other worlds. I mean, sometimes we can, but it is very risky and maybe not very accurate, right? So we don't know what we don't know. And when we don't know what we don't know, we assume sameness. I assumed everybody would do the thing and the lip. And then when I realized difference and I noticed difference, I assumed deficit. So I wanted to help them by doing more of what I know. So when I worked at Portland Community College, my main work was to support students, particularly students of color, navigate a predominantly white organization and overcome systemic racism, and then also be technical assistant to professors. And they had very unfortunate experiences with students. I would then sit down with professors. Many of them were very okay with it, and many of them just hated it. So this one person, instructor, was told to meet with me for an hour. I was like, yeah, because you meet with me for an hour and boom, we get rid of racism. I'm like, okay. So we met. She was not happy about it. And when we met, I said, okay, so you're not happy. Let's try and build some rapport here. So all of a sudden, she learns that at the time I was 40, and both of us, we had boys age 3. And then she said, oh, I'm so glad that you're 40, because when I met you, I thought, what am I going to learn from this 20-something girl? We'll talk more about that in a bit. But we have these stories of what is right and what is wrong based on our iceberg. And our icebergs don't speak to us with uncertainty. Our icebergs speak to us with certainty. I mean, I was certain that I was doing I had no doubt, because when I don't know difference, I assume sameness. And that when I notice difference, I tend to assume deficit. And then I claim, but that is just common sense. Anybody has heard common sense? I have, and I have a physical reaction every time I hear common sense, because I'm like, oh, common to who? Because you're not talking about me. Because my common sense is common to my iceberg, to my culture. And in highly diverse communities, the US being an amazing example in the world of that, we no longer have common sense. There's no common sense. So when we are like in that place of, oh, it's common, it's cultural difference, maybe. And this is what this kind of model offers us, is an opportunity to pause before we assume deficit, lack of professionalism, lack of ethics, lack of knowledge, lack of smarts, lack of care, lack of reason. Like, oh, flag. It is very likely none of this is very likely a cultural difference. And part of the skill sets that I need for intercultural communication and intercultural navigation is the assumption of social relativity, which is very, very hard because our iceberg really trains us to, this is the world. Okay, my life is a musical, and now I'm like, this is the world as we know it. No? Okay. I do that. I need to survive one way or another, and that's my coping mechanism. So our iceberg keeps saying, this is the thing, what is right and what is wrong. And we are challenged then to successfully communicate across cultures. We need to be then challenging our own ethnocentrism, because that's what these icebergs create. But ethnocentrisms are not all created equal, because there are some ethnocentrisms that are rewarded by a particular context and some that are not rewarded, right? Because my ethnocentrism about the lip and the nose is not very rewarded in the US, right? My emotional expression is not very rewarded in the US, right? So there is then a dominant culture iceberg that says this is what is right, and you there, other, are wrong. and you other may not deserve to be employed. You other may not deserve to have access to education or health. You other may not deserve to be free. So it is consequential. And this offers us moments for pausing. All right. Pressing the wrong one. I'm going to skip that. Okay. So we're going to concentrate in what low context cultures, high context, direct, indirect, formal, informal, emotionally expressive, or emotionally constrained. So think about this as ranges. You know, in my house, my nuclear household that I grew up, where?
Puerto Rico.
Exacto. I am the most extroverted, surprise, of everybody in my, the family of 5, right? But they're mostly extroverted. Except my father, who's very, very, very quiet. So it's a huge range. But you compare my father to other folks, maybe in Japan, and he's a party boss. Right? So it's all relative, and there's ranges. Okay. So thinking about that as ranges and relative to particular contexts, there are cultures that are mostly low context, and I'll let you know what that is, and other cultures that are mostly high context, and some cultures that are in between. A low context culture is a culture that depends mostly on the verbal communication. So low context is less context, right? Those are cultures that emphasize on well, this word means this, which really what I want to say is this, not this, because really this expressed better. When I had those first conversations in 1998, I was going cuckoo. It was driving me a certain kind of anxiety. Because I'm like, get with the gist of it. Come on, it's just stay with the spirit. But I don't come from an extreme low context culture. An extreme low context cultures will not use facial expressions like Puerto Ricans use it, because that is part of context. And there are cultures that are highly, highly high context cultures, where it depends mostly in the relationship that we have had before. It has a lot to do with what's happening in the room, what time of day, what kind of metaphors I'm using, the tone. Like a lot of what's happening is really giving you the message more so than the words I'm using. For example, a very traditional, perhaps Asian cultures, and I'm thinking rural China, perhaps. If someone from rural China, you invite them for, hey, come to my barbecue on Sunday at 3 p.m., they might say, thank you. It might be difficult. That means no. But in the US, we would put them, maybe. And they love the idea too. Right? But it is knowing exactly what is important to that culture. High context cultures are usually very formal and are group oriented. Therefore, one of the most monumentally important values is to not cause you embarrassment. Just to not shame you so that you can save face. So if I were to say, oh no, I don't like barbecue, that is to shame you, is to embarrass you for liking barbecue or inviting me. So I'm very concerned about you and our relationship. Now, a direct communicator or a low context communicator will say, but just tell me if you're coming or not. Because I care. Just tell me. We say things like straightforward. Don't beat around the bush. Like, no. Because we have the same purpose of protecting our relationship, we behave differently. For example, remember when we get sick? Like, oh, I get sick, and we want to make sure Ruth is not sick. So what do? Oh, in one culture is we go to the doctor. In another culture, we pray first. So we're doing two different things for the same purpose. So I'm trying to be professional here, therefore I'm doing this thing, but we're doing different things. One of the challenges for me as a, where I'm from? is that in Puerto Rico we lean towards conflict. Because the most important value in Puerto Rico is confianza, which is close relationships, like trusting close relationships. So if there is a conflict between you and I'll be like, oh, we have a conflict. Let's talk about it. Have you heard of Portland Nice? I have I can feel it in my body already. Like, oh. Just tell me already. It's like, if I say, oh, we're having a problem, what might happen and has happened is like, oh, you're always just focusing in the problems. Let's focus on what brings us together instead. I'm like, but we have a problem. And I want to solve that. And it's like, no, the problem is you for talking about the problem. You should not be talking about the trouble. But culturally, that doesn't, I'm like, but I care about you. And a Portlander will be like, no, because I care about you, you shouldn't do that. We are trying for the same things, respect, but we're doing different things for the same goal. To have effective communication, and I do different things, but because we have a dominant iceberg, then ways of being and communicating that do not correspond to that dominant culture iceberg are not just marginalized, are fired. Our livelihood is at risk. We don't have access to resources, to food, to health. We may be jailed because we didn't say the right thing to the police. This is key and really like an easy one, right? Like this is not like the most difficult. There are other things, changing policies, that are difficult. So knowing the time, is it now that I'm supposed to stop talking? At 11:40 or 11:50?
You have until noon.
Oh, it's noon. Oh, that's why, because I want to do the role plays. I was like, why did I say 11:40 in my brain? Okay, so like I said, in high context cultures, we depend on the context, on the history behind. Those cultures tend to be group focused, indirect communicators that access third party consultants. So for example, let's say, I forgot your name already. It was Carol. I was going to say Claire. So close. Carol. So, right, Carol, I have had a very difficult conversation with Heather, and I want to talk with you about it. In direct communication, we even have this in employee handbooks, that I'm not supposed to talk to Carol until I speak with Heather. Yeah. There are cultures that, because I care about my relationship with Heather, I want to go to my advisor, Carol, and be like, I really need to bounce some ideas. Now, this is not gossip. There's a thing called gossip that is bad. Like, Heather is terrible. That's gossip, right? Instead, I'm like, I don't know what to do. Oh, I was hurt, right? Or I think I hurt Heather. That's a third-party consultant. And the purpose is, again, to save face, to make sure that I don't embarrass Heather, therefore saving our relationship. Okay? In cultures that are more low context, that is considered gossip and disrespectful. And then you cannot trust Ruth because Ruth will, spread gossip about you. And she's not a professional. All right. And then, as opposed to low context cultures, where low context cultures, such as the US, Germany, Switzerland, very, white European cultures predominantly, rely on the literal and precise meaning of words, tend to be informal communicators, tend to be direct communicators, are individual focused culturally, so it's not so much about the group, but making sure that what I want to communicate is effectively communicated. So I'm like, do you hear me? What did you hear from me? Because I want to make sure that you got my message, right? Very direct. And see third-party conversations as suspicious. So while we're trying to do and accomplish the same thing, we are doing completely different things. And because we're doing different things from different icebergs, we are arriving to completely different conclusions about each other. And that creates what is at the core cultural conflict. Pressing the wrong one. Okay, so low context cultures tends to be individualistic values, right? So individualism, I'm not trashing individualism. This has gotten the US to a lot of progress and a lot of the things that, we have today, right? But that is a fact. It's an individualistic culture, right? Self-sufficiency, we have structured even, and put it into laws and policies, ways to promote to be self-sufficient and be, your own person. Self-face concern, so I don't want to embarrass myself. It's a very, very important. Linear direct style. I remember, again, 1998, people were like, okay, so I'm going to talk about 3 things. This. Okay, about 1, blah, 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 blah. Okay, about 2, this. About 3, da, 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 da. In conclusion, what I said about 1 was this. About 2, this. I'm like, oh, just kill me now. Just kill me now. I don't jive with that. But it's very clear, right? It's very little chance of lack of communication, but I am not feeling very close to you. Right? Our relationship might not be being fostered, nurtured by this interaction because it's not the point. Right? Okay. Predominant meanings are in the verbal messages and low scanning. Scanning is when you are noticing what is happening in the context. People in the US are not trained to do context scanning. Some people, again, it's a range. Some people tend to be better than others, but still this is not an emphasis. And remember about the perception filters and how they're impacted by culture? The scanning is one of them. But we can train ourselves. This is something actually that I've tried to work because I've worked with a lot of folks from around the world when I was doing leadership development for international students. In high context cultures, group-oriented values is the tendency. Okay? Mutual face concern, so I don't want to embarrass myself and I don't want to embarrass you. Communication tends to be circular and indirect because I don't want to insult your intelligence. This is a very important one. So if I say in Puerto Rico, there's a lot of sayings. A caballo regalado no se le mira el colmillo. To a free horse, you don't check their teeth. Something like that.
Don't look at the person in the mouth.
That's the one?
I think that's the
What? Say it again?
Don't look a gift horse in the mouth.
A gifted horse in the mouth? Yes, that's the one. Okay. So imagine that you didn't know it. You'd be like, why is she talking about horses at all? Right? So we need a context, a shared context to know what is it that I mean. Like I said, don't be like the boy who cried wolf. You're like, I know what she's saying. Huh? So in cultures that are high context, there's a lot of that. A lot of metaphor, a lot of stories, and I'm not gonna say, like in the US or Germany, perhaps I would say, yeah, what is it? Gifted horse.
Don't look a gift horse in the mouth.
Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Hold on, I lost it because I'm like, really, that is incredible that there is one in English. So my brain is going all places now. Okay, high context. Oh, yes. And then I would go, what I mean by that is that when something is free, you don't get too picky. Understand? So when I'm giving you an apple for free, you might not want to see and complain about the dent. That's a lot of explaining. In high context cultures, that is a message of, well, you're not very smart, so you're gonna need some explaining. So they would avoid the explaining because I don't want you to think that I think that you're not smart. I think you're thinking of a particular event. Right? Oh yeah, I remember that conversation. All right, well, at least I hope. All right. So in continuum of difference again, and this I have several handouts for you. In this one, you will see an explanation of the direct versus indirect communication continuum. What I'm going to ask you is that, first of all, you honor the trees by reading what's in here. Thank you, trees. This is a sacrifice, and we're not going to dishonor them by not reading. So please, it's just 3 pages. Okay? So in here, you will find information about how to just like, am I direct? Am I indirect? But by what I have shared already, you might already think like, I think I'm mostly this. I think I'm mostly this. So I want you to keep in mind the continuum. And look at this. There's also the different competencies for intercultural communication, different definitions, and also high context and low context. And this is the cheat sheet that I love, love, love. The essentials, I only see one. Essentials for teaching across cultures. Oh, I'm going to send you another one because there's one that has information about how to adapt. Right? Okay. Now, there's some tips in that I didn't create it. These are, again, I have no book to write. Someone else wrote this. That was amazing. And in that, there's tips that I'm like, yeah, okay. For example, it says for high context indirect communicators, don't read between the lines. And I'm like, that's what I do. And it says to direct communicators, low context, like, find the meaning between the lines. Like, you cannot just will it. You can always check. And that, I'm like, yes, I can say, well, when I hear this, I conclude this. Am I near or far? Right? Those we can do. Especially once we know, it's like, yeah, you and I don't speak the same language, quote unquote, direct or indirect. Okay, so imagine that you know, and at the end you will leave with your handout. And again, I insist that you please read them and follow. I'll follow up, Heather, with the tips. Although you also have the slideshow. Are they getting the slideshow? Okay, yeah, it's here. It's right there. Okay. There are suggestions for low context, direct cultures folks to work with high context, indirect culture folks. Right? For example, think of alternate meanings. Don't take everything literally. I'm like, yeah, tell that to my ex-husband, who is a direct communicator, is like a poster child. Like, he is not gonna look for alternative meaning. There's a reason why he's an ex-husband. And then the other one is suggestions for high context and direct cultures. Do not read too much in between the lines. Like, well, but that's what I do. But what I encourage folks is to then ask questions. In social relativism, what we are challenged to do is to consider that my conclusion might not be the conclusion of this other person. Therefore, I don't use the common sense thing, nor the golden rule. You know the golden rule? Treat others the way you want to be treated. That is ethnocentric. So instead, it's the platinum rule. Treat others the way they want to be treated. Therefore, I need to ask questions. Check. Use now those communication skills, paraphrasing, summarizing, clarifying questions. All right. So I'm going to ask for two volunteers. One person who is like, I think I'm direct communicator, and I'll be indirect. And then a person who is like, yeah, I think that I'm indirect, and I'll be a direct communicator. And you'll see why I'm an award-winning actress. Okay, hands. Okay, while you think about it, I'll drink a little bit of water. Okay. Oh, thank you. And do you know if or you have a sense that you're direct or indirect? Direct. Okay. And what's your name? Melinda. Thank you so much, because you're daring to do this very difficult thing. It's not. It's for the benefit. No, you're good there. It's for the benefit of our collective learning. So thank you for doing that. So we're going to pretend that you and I have a project to build a bulletin board, but I don't, it's random. So you're direct, I'm indirect. Okay, so I'm approaching you because I see you, and I'll be an indirect self, and you just respond accordingly. In the context of, we have a bulletin board that is due this Friday. Good? All right. Melinda, right? Okay. I'm like, hi, Melinda. So good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. How's your family? Yeah. And have you been good with health? Because there's so much going on now.
I'm great.
Okay, good. I'm so glad. I haven't seen you in a while. You must be very busy. Yeah? Yeah. Anything that I can help with? No. Okay, you let me know. Okay. So talking about projects, I don't know if you remember, there's the bulletin board. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it.
Let's get it done.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Do you want to meet and talk about, what we want to have it look like, or what you want, envision?
Where is the bulletin board?
Oh, yeah. So we have to first find where it is.
Do you have all the stuff needed? Do you have a plan?
Well, I thought that we can talk about the plan, and it can be anything.
Okay, do you want me to lunch?
Okay, anytime we can have lunch.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, perfect. That's great.
All right.
I'll see you for lunch. So nice to see you, Melinda. All right. Thank you, Melinda. Okay, how did that feel for folks? Let's talk about feelings first.
I'd be even more direct if I were Melinda. I'd be like, I think it should be about this size and.
It's a range.
Right, and here's my concept. What do you think?
There you
Or
go.
really, maybe not what do you think, just here's my concept.
Here's my concept. Let's meet.
Can you execute it?
There you go. I mean, it's a range. It's a huge range. But, I was trying to do the most indirect. What did we feel when, you were hearing this interaction?
She was feeling awkward with your nice face.
Were you?
Yes.
Yeah. Direct communicators will get suspicious. Be like, oh, like, I don't believe it for a moment that they care about my family. They're thinking about the bulletin board. They don't dare to say it. Just say it. Just say it. Indirect communicators genuinely will prioritize relationships first. Relationships first. It's a genuine thing. But a direct communicator will be like, okay, whatever.
No, like I truly, sometimes I'm like, stop pretending you care. Let's just move on. Like.
So let's consider that it's very likely that they are not pretending. And that they're also trying to make sure that you're not embarrassed by my broaching the subject of the bulletin board, which means that you can free me from my holding this thing. I don't want to embarrass you. And you're like, yes, that's right. We need to talk about the bulletin board.
So like, do you remember the bulletin board piece was a little bit like trying to navigate, like, this is what I want to talk about right now, but like when you have something that's scheduled for Friday and you're supposed to work with this person, you haven't talked about it at all yet, you would think that the first thing you would say when you see that person is to discuss the bulletin board.
You're seeking connection.
Is seeking connection, is holding relationship before the project. Now, direct communicators, particularly in the US, is very forward approach, right? The goal. What is it that we're going to achieve? Forget about this moment. The goal, right? So this is an invitation to pause for a moment. I know that this, and not to shame yourself. It's like, no, this is my style. Get it. And that's their style. Okay. And we can navigate this difference. We have tools, right? All right. So it's 12. The same thing happens with direct communicators. If I was to be the direct communicator talking with a person that is indirect, usually the direct communicator will offend the indirect communicator. Because they're angry at me. Oh no, they're angry at me. I didn't mean, I don't, oh, now I have to then double down on my relationship building. And it is a snowballing effect, right? So it's best when we have the tools of knowledge to then interrupt the snowballing effect. Because I can tell, okay, I know that this is my tendency. I have a sense that this is the tendency. And I can then pause the snowballing effect. Okay, I would like 2 volunteers to share in voz alta, out loud, what you don't want to forget about this session, and then we'll go and have lunch and all the good stuff. Something you don't want to forget. And the reason I ask people to say it out loud is because when I say out loud what I don't want to forget, I tend to remember. And also, it helps with the collective learning.
Just acknowledge that there can be value in indirect communication. It
Yes.
doesn't feel efficient to me, but it can
Yes.
create a
So,
collaborative
yes.
platform.
Indirect communication is best for relationship building. Direct communication is best for emergencies.
Or everyday life.
Time is money. Time is money. Yeah, it's culture is impacted by capitalism. Will definitely be like, yeah, and
So you just dropped the mic.
that's a mic drop moment.
The platinum rule, treat others as they want to be treated.
Thank you. Okay.
Communication is irreversible.
Yes, it's very consequential. I had a lot of fun this morning. Thank you so much for creating this space for collective learning and creating this. Thank you, Heather, for inviting me and trusting me. I'll be here if you want to talk some more. And I am at the Oregon Food Bank, and this is my job.